A summary of the long discourses of the Buddha. A summary of the 34 Suttas. Digha Nikaya, the long discourses of the Buddha. Author, Maurice Walshe.
Khái quát nội dung Kinh Trường Bộ. Tác giả, Thượng tọa Thích Nhật Từ.
Division 1. The Moralities. 1. Brahmayala Sutta. The Supreme Net, what the teaching is not. The monks observed the wanderer Suppya arguing with his pupil about the merits of the Buddha, his doctrine, Dhamma, and the order, Sangha. The Buddha tells them not to be affected by either praise or blame of the teaching, and declares that the worldling will praise him for superficial reasons and not for the essence of his teaching. He lists 62 different types of wrong view, all of which are based on contact of the six sense bases and their objects. Contact conditions craving, which in turn leads to clinging, to becoming, to birth, to aging and death, and all manner of suffering. But the Tathagata, the Buddha, has gone beyond these things, and all 62 wrong views are trapped in his net. 2. Samanaphala Sutta, the fruits of the homeless life. King Ajatasattu of Magadha, who gained the throne by parricide, comes to the Buddha with a question he has already posed in vain to 6 rival philosophers. What are the fruits, visible here and now, in this life, of the life of renunciation? The Buddha tells him, and then goes on to speak of the higher benefits, the various meditative states, and finally true liberation. This section recurs in the next 11 suttas. The king, deeply impressed, declares himself a lay follower. The Buddha later tells his disciples that but for his crime Ajatasattu would have become a stream winner by the opening of the Dhamma eye. 3. Ambattha Sutta, about Ambattha, pride humbled. Pakarasati, a famous Brahmin teacher, sends his pupil Ambattha, supposedly fully trained in Brahmin lore, to find out if the ascetic Gautama is the great man he is alleged to be and if, therefore, he bears the 32 marks of a great man. Ambattha, proud of his Brahmin birth, behaves stupidly and arrogantly towards the Buddha, and thereupon learns a thing or two about his own ancestry. Besides being made to realize that the Khattiyas, the warrior noble caste, are superior to the Brahmins. Humbled, he returns to Pakarasati, who is furious at his conduct, hastens to see the Buddha, learns that he does indeed bear the 32 marks, and becomes a convert. 4. Sanadanda Sutta, about Sanadanda, qualities of a true Brahmin. The Brahmin Sanadanda of Kampa learns of the ascetic Gautama's arrival, and goes to see him, against the advice of other Brahmins who think it beneath his dignity. The Buddha asks him about the qualities of a true Brahmin. He mentions 5, but at the Buddha's instance admits that these can be reduced to 2. Wisdom and morality. He becomes a convert but does not experience the opening of the Dhamma eye. 5. Kuttadanta Sutta, about Kuttadanta, a bloodless sacrifice. The Brahmin Kuttadanta wants to hold a great sacrifice with the slaughter of many hundreds of beasts. He appeals, improbably, as Rhys Davids points out, to the Buddha for advice on how to do this. The Buddha tells him the story of an ancient king and his Brahmin chaplain, who performed a purely symbolic, bloodless sacrifice. Kuttadanta sits in silence at the end of this narrative, having realized that the Buddha did not say, "I have heard this," and the Buddha confirms that it is a story from one of his past lives, thus technically a birth story, Jataka. The Buddha then tells of sacrifices more profitable, that is, the higher benefits as in Sutta 2. Kuttadanta liberates the hundreds of animals he had destined for slaughter, saying, "Let them be fed with green grass, and given cool water to drink, and let cool breezes play upon them." He becomes a lay follower, and the pure and spotless Dhamma eye opens in him. 6. Mahali Sutta, about Mahali, heavenly sights, soul and body. Atthatta, surnamed Mahali, the Lichavi inquires of the Buddha about why some people cannot hear heavenly sounds, and so on, which the Buddha explains as due to their practice of one-sided samadhi. In the latter part, the Buddha tells how two ascetics, Mandisa and Jalya, had asked him whether the soul, or life principle, is the same as the body, or different. This is one of the unanswered questions mentioned in Sutta 9. The Buddha says anyone who has attained to higher states of understanding will no longer be bothered by such questions. 7. Jalya Sutta, about Jalya merely repeats the last part of Sutta 6. 8. Mahasahanata Sutta, the great lion's roar is also called the lion's roar to Kassapa. The naked ascetic Kassapa asks if it is true that the Buddha condemns all forms of austerity. The Buddha denies this, saying one must distinguish. Kassapa gives a list of standard practices, some of them rather revolting. And the Buddha says one may do any of these things, but if one's morality, heart and wisdom are not developed, one is still far from being an ascetic or a Brahmin. In the true sense, he himself has practiced all possible austerities to perfection, and morality and wisdom as well. Kassapa requests ordination, and soon through diligent practice he becomes an arahant. 9. Padapada Sutta, about Padapada, states of consciousness. The ascetic Padapada tells the Buddha that he and his fellows have been debating about the higher extinction of consciousness, and seeks a ruling on the matter. The Buddha says those who think mental states arise and pass away by chance are quite wrong. He lists the various jhana states, showing how perception can be controlled. Padapada says he has never heard anything like all this before. The discussion moves to various kinds of possible self, all of which the Buddha refutes, and to the unanswered questions, and the reason for their not being answered. Sutta, son of an elephant trainer, joins in the discussion, and finally, while Padapada becomes a lay follower, Sutta becomes a bhikkhu and soon gains arahantship. In this sutta we first find the parable of the man who said he was in love with the most beautiful girl in the country, without knowing who she was or what she looked like. 10. Subha Sutta, about Subha, morality, concentration, wisdom. Shortly after the Buddha's death, Ananda explains the Aryan morality, concentration and wisdom, as in Sutta 2, to the young Brahmin Subha, who becomes a lay follower. 11. Kevada Sutta, about Kevada, what Brahma didn't know. Kevada urges the Buddha to perform miracles to strengthen people's faith. The Buddha refuses, saying the only kind of miracle he approves of is the miracle of instruction. He tells the story of the monk who wanted to know where the four great elements cease without remainder. By psychic power he ascended into the heavens, but none there could tell him. Not even the great Brahma, who referred him back to the Buddha for an answer. 12. Lohika Sutta, about Lohika, good and bad teachers. Lohika has the pernicious view that if anyone were to discover some new doctrine, he should keep it to himself. The Buddha puts him right and explains the difference between good and bad teachers. 13. Tavya Sutta, the threefold knowledge, the way to Brahma. Two young Brahmins are puzzled because different teachers speak of different ways of attaining fellowship, or union, with Brahma, which to them is the highest goal. The Buddha gets them to admit that none of their teachers, or even those from whom the tradition stems, have ever seen Brahma face to face, then instructs them in the Brahmaviharas, which do lead to that goal which is not, of course, the goal of Buddhism. Division 2. The Great Division. 14. Mahapadana Sutta, the Great Discourse on the Lineage. This refers to the last 7 Buddhas, going back 91 eons in time. The life of the Buddha Vipassana at that remote period is told in terms similar to early versions of the life of Gautama. All Buddhas go through the same experiences in their last earthly life. The Buddha's realization is equated with the understanding of dependent origination. See next sutta. 15. Mahanidana Sutta, the Great Discourse on Origination. Ananda is rebuked for saying the law of dependent origination is as clear to him. The Buddha explains it in reverse order first, but going back only to mind and body and consciousness, that is, factors 4 and 3 of the usual list of 12. And also omitting the 6 sense bases, number 5. The exposition ends with a reference to the 7 stages of consciousness and the 2 realms. 16. Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Great Passing, the Buddha's Last Days. The longest sutta of all, telling, not without some legendary embroidery, the story of the Buddha's last days. King Ajatasattu, wishing to attack the Vajrayans, sends to the Buddha to know what the outcome will be. The Buddha replies indirectly, pointing out the advantages of the Vajrayan republican system, and later urges the monks to observe comparable rules for the Sangha. With Ananda, he visits a series of places and gives discourses to monks and laity. At Pataligama he prophesies the place's future greatness. It became Asoka's capital Pataliputra. At Vassali the courtesan Ambapali invites him to a meal and gives her mango grove to the order. He tells Ananda that he will pass away within 3 months. At Pava Kunda the smith serves a meal including pig's delight, sukara madhava, pork, truffles. Opinions vary, which only the Buddha eats. Later he is taken very ill, but is careful to exonerate Kunda. At Kusinara the Buddha rests between twin sal trees. Ananda begs him not to pass away in such an insignificant place. But he says it was once a famous capital, see Sutta 17. After giving last instructions to the Sangha and refusing to appoint a successor, he utters the final admonition, strive on untiringly, apamadina sampadatha, and passes away. The sutta concludes with an account of the funeral and distribution of the ashes in 8 portions. 17. Mahasudassana Sutta, the Great Splendor, a King's Renunciation. Much the same story recurs in Jataka 95. King Mahasudassana lived in fairy tale splendor and possessed the 7 treasures, but finally retired to his Dhamma palace, built by the gods, to lead a life of meditation. 18. Janavasabha Sutta, about Janavasabha, Brahma addresses the gods. A yaka, of the good variety, appears to the Buddha declaring that he is now called Janavasabha, but on earth was King Bimbisara of Magadha, the Buddha's great supporter, killed by his son Ajatasattu. He tells of the assembly of the 33 gods at which Brahma declared how, since the Buddha's mission on earth, the ranks of the gods, devas, are increasing and those of their opponents the asuras, declining. 19. Mahagovinda Sutta, the Great Steward, a past life of Gautama. The Gandhava Pankasika appears to the Buddha and reports, similarly to Sutta 18, on a meeting of the gods. Then follows the story of the Great Steward who conducted the affairs of 7 kings and then retired into the homeless life, bringing many people to the Brahma world, which is the highest people can reach in an age when there is no Buddha. At the end the Buddha tells Pankasika that he was that steward, but that the path he now teaches, as the Buddha, goes beyond what he was able to teach then. 20. Mahasamaya Sutta, the Mighty Gathering, Devas come to see the Buddha. A sutta practically all in verse giving much mythological lore. 21. Sakapana Sutta, Sakka's questions, a god consults the Buddha. Sakka, king of the 33 gods, approaches the Buddha through the aid of Pankasika. who sings a love song to him to attract his attention. Sakka puts various questions on the holy life to the Buddha. We also hear the story of the nun Gopika, who became a man, and as such rebuked 3 of the Buddha's monks who had been reborn in the lowest of the heavens, bidding them strive harder and rise higher, which 2 of them succeeded in doing. Sakka himself is put on the right path and rewards Pankasika, who is not so advanced with the hand of the Gandhaba maiden he desired. 22. Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the greater discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. Very different in character from the suttas immediately preceding. This is held by many to be the most important sutta in the canon. It recurs verbatim less verses 18 to 21, as number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya. The one way, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and distress, for the gaining of nibbana is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of body, feelings, mind and mind objects. Detailed instructions for mindful awareness of breathing, and so on, are given. Thus, under mind objects, we read, for example, if sensual desire is present in himself, a monk knows that it is present. If sensual desire is absent in himself, a monk knows that it is absent. And he knows how unarisen sensual desire comes to arise, and he knows how the abandonment of arisen sensual desire comes about. And he knows how the non-arising of the abandoned sensual desire in the future will come about. Monk here, according to the commentary, means anyone who does the practice. The sutta ends with an account of the 4 noble truths. 23. Payasi Sutta, about Payasi, debate with a skeptic. Prince Payasi does not believe in future lives, or in the rewards and penalties of good and bad deeds. The Ven. Kumara Kassapa convinces him of his error by means of a series of clever parables. Finally Payasi, converted, establishes a charity for ascetics and the needy, but does so grudgingly. As a result he is reborn in the lowest of the heavens. Division 3. The Patika Division. 24. Patika Sutta, about Patikaputa, the charlatan. The Buddha has an exceedingly stupid disciple Sanakata, who eventually leaves him. Sanakata is greatly impressed by some dubious, holy men, whom he takes to be arahants. The boastful naked ascetic Patikaputa challenges the Buddha to a contest of miracles. The Buddha waits for him to appear, but as the Buddha prophesied, he cannot even rise from his seat. To meet the Buddha, the sutta is not unamusing, but definitely substandard material. A final section on the origin of things seems to have been tacked on. 25. Udambarika Siyanata Sutta, the lions roar to the Udambarikans. The wanderer Nigroda, staying at the Udambarika lodging, boasts that he can floor the ascetic Gautama with a single question. He is of course defeated, and the Buddha shows a way beyond that of self-mortification, to reach the pith. 26. Kakavati Siyanata Sutta, the lions roar on the turning of the wheel. At the beginning and end of the discourse, the Buddha exhorts his monks to keep to their own preserves by the practice of mindfulness. Then he tells of a wheel-turning monarch, a righteous ruler, who had the sacred wheel treasure, which had to be carefully guarded. He was followed by a line of righteous kings, but eventually they degenerated, and society went from bad to worse, while the human lifespan sank to 10 years and all sense of morality was lost. After a brief but dreadful sword interval, things improved, and finally another Buddha, Medaya, Sanskrit Maitreya, will appear. 27. Agana Sutta, on knowledge of beginnings. A somewhat similar fable, this time addressed to the Brahmins, whose pretensions the Buddha refutes. There is no difference between Brahmins and others if they behave badly. A somewhat fanciful account of the origin of castes is given. 28. Sampasadaniya Sutta, serene faith. Sariputta explains his reasons for his complete faith in the Buddha. 29. Pasadika Sutta, the delightful discourse. A discussion of good and bad teachers, and why the Buddha has not revealed certain points. 30. Lakkhana Sutta, the marks of a great man. Verses on the curious 32 marks of a great man beloved of the Brahmins. These are in a variety of meters in the original. 31. Sigalaka Sutta, to Sigalaka, advice to lay people. Advice to the young layman Sigalaka on morality, related to the 4 quarters, zenith and nadir which, in memory of his father, he had been worshipping. 32. Atanatiya Sutta, the Adinata protective verses. 33. Sangiti Sutta, the chanting together, lists of terms for recitation. 34. Dasutara Sutta, expanding decades. Similar material to Sutta 33, arranged under 10 heads.